to introduce you to Matthew Stevenson from the University of Salford. Matt is going to give us a presentation on legal aspects of social media. He's Head of Information Governance here and is responsible for freedom of information, data protection and information management. And I'd like to pass you on to him now and leave you in his good hands.
Thank you very much. It's very nice to be here to be speaking to you. You're all very welcome. What I'm going to be talking about today is what was on the programme, the legal aspects of social media, but all the stuff as well that isn't legal aspect, but it's stuff that perhaps you haven't thought about, perhaps more governance aspects of social media, which, while not being necessarily legal, are certainly things that you need to think about and you need to include in your policies and planning and management of social media. So hopefully it's legal aspects and more of social media. No, I'm not using the keyboard. Now, when you think about, well, some of you might not think about the University of Salford at all, but what we want is that when people think about the University of Salford, they're thinking about this, Media City, just been opened by Prince Philip 2 weeks ago, all very exciting and dynamic and new. What we don't want is headlines in a newspaper because somebody's done something that they shouldn't have been doing with a blog, Facebook, Twitter, any other aspect of social media. So what we need to do is we need to make sure that we've got everything in place to make sure that we reduce this as much as possible. Just so you don't get worried, this isn't an actual headline. I found this on the internet yesterday. You put in the words and it creates a little newspaper article. So there was never an article that said a very silly member of staff. Now, I think you all know probably what the problems with social media are, but what I think the problems are that it's proliferated so much over the past few years. It seems to be absolutely everywhere all of a sudden, and everybody wants to use it for everything. It's become all things for all people, and you've got lecturers who want to use it for lectures, and you've got students tweeting each other. You name it, somebody has come up with an idea where social media is the answer. But unfortunately, accompanied with that, there aren't the rules progressing at the same speed. So you've got the interest and the keenness to use social media much further ahead than any rules about how you actually use social media in a corporate context. Another factor is the fact that people seem to have blurred the boundaries between work and home. And so on professional blogs, people are talking about their cats, and on their home blogs, people are talking about their work, and that makes things much more difficult to manage. Now, if you've come here for any answers, unfortunately, I don't think you're going to get them. But what I can do is perhaps guide you towards where you might get answers. Every institution will have their own answers and their own solutions to these problems. So what I'm going to do is sort of highlight what some issues are, some legal aspects, some laws that we have to abide by, and then every institution has to work out how they're going to manage it, what their approach is going to be, and what their appetite for the risk involved in these things will be. Now, I think that the use of social media can be boiled down into, I think, these 4 elements. And if you remember these 4 elements and nothing else, then I'll be quite satisfied with you going away with a decent message. They are, and I'm sure you can read, so I don't know why I'm saying them, lawful, aware of other risks, responsible, and sensible. And I think they're all different. And I'm going to go into each of these, and that will be my presentation. So, lawful. Some of the most important laws that relate to use of social media are copyright, privacy and data protection. I noticed that some of you are writing all this down. What I'll do is I will send this presentation to the organisers after the event, so that you can use them. Every slide is something like this, so it's not a verbatim account of what I'm saying, but it will act as a sort of like a reminder. Some of the most important laws that you have to bear in mind when using social media, I think the most important is copyright. Second of all, privacy and data protection, defamation and libel, court decisions, and then there are some other laws as well, and I'm going to go into each of these a little bit more now. Copyright. I think copyright's perhaps the most straightforward one because it's possibly the one that people know most about. Pasting pictures and photos that you get elsewhere on the internet is illegal. unless you go onto somewhere like Flickr and actually search for photos that are copyright free or have Creative Commons licenses attached to them, you can't just find something on the internet and think, well, because it's in the internet, I can just repurpose it and use it for my purposes. You can't. You know, perhaps you can and get away with it, but it's still against the law. So if you're after a picture of a beekeeper or a lab or somebody doing something else, go onto somewhere like Flickr. In the advanced search, there is an option to find copyright-free or or Creative Commons photos, and you'll probably find the pictures that you want there. You know, you may not find exactly the right thing, but it should do you fine. If you're putting things onto social media and they're going out on the internet, there are companies who only exist to find copyright breaches on the internet and report them to the people who own the material, and that can get you into trouble. So it's better to be safe than sorry. Also, pasting, reposting or retweeting from copyright sources, again, is illegal, so you need to be very careful. If you link to something, and that happens to be illegal anyway, then that's not quite the same. But if something else is somewhere, don't just assume because it's on the internet, you can copy and paste it. Streaming, I would advise you to be very wary of streaming. Every streaming source has its own licenses, and a lot of these places say, while you stream from here, you're fine, but you can't necessarily just embed something in your own particular site and assume it's going to be okay. You've got to look at the small print and see what it says. Some may allow you, but most don't. And again, you're better off just linking to that particular site and looking at it there rather than embedding. And also, I think you need to be very careful of perhaps having illegal material yourself. And not just yourselves, but also this presentation is aimed at institutions, but also institutions to pass the message on to their students. If a student doesn't have permission to record a lecture, and then they post it on their website or somewhere, then unless they've got permission from the institution and from the lecturer, then they're breaking the law. If somebody films a concert and the tickets say you're not allowed to film the concert, then they're breaking the law. So you may have made the pictures yourself and think that it's absolutely fine, but that's not the case. Privacy and data protection, well, in a nutshell, I would say that don't put anything anywhere about anybody unless you have their permission. Data protection is a very big act, and it's very complicated, and I'm not going to go into it at all. But if ever you're posting information about another person, just think, is what I'm doing fair? Do they know about it and are they happy with it? Am I doing it for a specific reason? And it's probably telling me that I need to be here. Is that a reason that's okay, and do they know what that reason is? And is all this above board and transparent? And if you're not sure, then if in doubt, it's probably best not to do it. Defamation and libel. I think you need to be very careful about what you put out on the internet. Everybody knows things that are absolutely true, but whether or not you could actually find the source of that information is another matter. So just because you think it's true, make sure that you know that it is and you've got references. Be very wary of making allegations by using your opinion. Well, I think that what Jack Straw has done is absolutely blah, blah, blah. Or I think Abu Qatada has done so and so. Be very careful with those things, because even if they're not true and there is no crime that's been committed by you, somebody can still decide to sue you, to sue your institution. And very often organisations are very risk averse, and they would rather settle out of court, even if there's no case to answer, than to actually take it through to the nth degree and say, look, there was no law broken here. So it's not just the breaking of law, it's the perception of the breaking of law. Court decisions, well, this time a year ago, there was lots in the news about injunctions. You can't just be saying willy-nilly, the person who, you know, is supposedly slept with a prostitute is so-and-so, or anything like that. You need to be very wary. So avoid anything like that, and certainly make sure that your students don't start spreading things around on this. I know that with the injunctions, it all happened on the Twitterverse, and it probably was too broad for anybody to take any action. But you know, all they need to do is pick on one person as an example, and you know, it could be a student who can say. So do be very wary of things that perhaps you know you shouldn't be, but you know, it's always nice to gossip, but I think, you know, gossiping in an absolutely sealed room to one person is one thing, but on Twitter there is no such thing as gossip, because it's all public and everybody can see everything that you're doing. And finally, from the legal point of view, I just want to mention two other things. One is computer misuse. There is a Computer Misuse Act, and just a couple of examples, which is what people can do on, say, Facebook, going in and changing people's records on Facebook. And one thing that my friends certainly do with me is false tagging of people in photos. Very often you want people to look at a particular picture, so you tag in all your friends, whether or not your friends are actually in that picture. And you go and have a look, and then you realise it's pub's got a new different type of beer on or something like that. It could be anything. That's actually against the law. It breaks the Computer Misuse Act. So again, students need to be aware of that, and they need to be very careful about what they're doing, because what they may think is a joke, it is actually in breach of the law. And one final thing, disorder and terrorism. You know, we've all heard about things where people have tweeted, "Wow, brilliant, the riots, who's joining me?" All sorts of things like that. Making a group on Facebook, let's trash, was it Crewe or Warrington or somewhere?
I'm not sure you've noticed. From that neck
I'm sure, I'll take your word for it, but people have gone to prison for that sort of thing, and you know, again, it might be tongue-in-cheek, it might be a joke, they might have meant any harm by it, but it is against the law. I think it's the Serious Crime Act, and people have gone to prison for a number of years. So again, you just need to be very careful, especially students who perhaps don't understand the ramifications of what they're doing. We want to talk about some other risks now, which aren't necessarily legal, but I think are just as important, if not actually more important. Now, these are primarily reputational, but also there are what I've described as commercial and academic risks. Reputational, it's very easy to put something on the internet that you don't realise the impact it might make. So, you know, something could go out on a Facebook group saying, don't contact our department of, I don't know, social media because it's been closed due to vandalism. Well, that sends a signal that your university isn't secure, it's not safe, it's in a rough area, and it might put off students. And all you need is the local newspaper to get hold of that, and there could be all sorts of impact on student recruitment, student retention, that you need to be very wary of. Very often you've got lots of factions within departments, all fighting with each other, falling out with everybody. And we had a case very similar to this within the university, where somebody had fallen out with somebody else. And all you need is one little, you know, on a blog post or something, oh, by the way, here's a document that proves I was right all along, whatever it is. And again, all you need is a newspaper to get hold of that, Private Eye or The Guardian, or here, the Manchester Evening News, Times Higher, that says, you know, massive factions within the Department of X, causing lots of trouble, can the university control its own staff, all sorts of things like that. Another aspect is something slightly different. On any university sort of controlled social media space, there's lots of different levels of what that social media is. There might be the Vice-Chancellor's blog, which is pumping out the actual, you know, the word of the university as approved by the University Council and then made polished and nice by the PR office. And that's all, you know, absolute solid gold, and you can't, it's wonderful stuff, and I read hours every single week, obviously. But then at the very bottom, you've got the university's rugby union club, and they're going off on tour every week and getting drunk and doing all sorts of nude things involving drink and all sorts of things. But they are part of the university, and it's going to be virtually impossible to get that rugby team to have a web presence without saying what their connection with the university is. So there will be, at the sort of very bottom rung, all sorts of different activity going on that you can't prevent being connected with the university, that you may actually not want to be associated with. And that obviously has complications there. And one final one, every institution has official channels whereby certain information should be made available in certain ways. So at the university, we have shared file stores for sharing documents between staff. We have the VLE for sharing teaching and learning notes with students. And the last thing we want is for an academic to think, oh, sod it, I can't be bothered using Blackboard. I'm just going to put it on my Facebook page because 98% of my students are on Facebook and they can see it. Well, first of all, that's putting the information out in the public domain, so that will be a damage to the university's commercial interest, but also 98% of students isn't enough. It should be 100% of students, and that one student who isn't on Facebook couldn't get the document on Blackboard, they put in a complaint against the university because they're at a disadvantage, or because of a lazy lecturer. And they thought they were doing the right thing, but in actual fact, there are certain rules that have to be abided by. Personal reputation. It's very easy to tweet or to blog or to put on Facebook where you were last night, how drunk you got, who you ended up sleeping with, where you vomited, all sorts of different things. And if you're putting things out in the public domain, people will find them. Bosses, children, fathers, wives, potential employers, students, it could be anybody. So you need to be very careful. And it could be what you do in your personal life, or it could be something that you do at work, something that you might not necessarily want people to know about. And you have to remember that people will see this stuff. Pictures on Facebook. Again, it might not necessarily be your pictures, it might be pictures that you've been tagged in that might be visible to other people because of the settings that you have or that your friends have got. And also think about the links that you have on your Facebook page and your blogs and things like that. You know, would you necessarily want somebody to know that you were part of the Love Bunny S&M group, or that you were a member of, let's say, Salford Mental Health Forum? You know, it might be the case that, you know, thinking about my point of view, I could advise the Salford Mental Health Forum on data protection issues, but then if a potential employer is looking at my Facebook page, they might see that and they may jump to either an appropriate or an inappropriate conclusion and think, well, we don't want to employ him because he's a sex-mad nut job. And it's not whether or not that's the case, it's what people believe and what they perceive and what they infer from the information you're putting out there. So do be very careful and pass the message on to the students that they need to be careful.
I suppose in that case you might consider that you might not want to work for someone who operates in such an ill-judged way.
You may, absolutely,
Yeah.
and obviously that's your decision.
Mm.
But you know, you need to think about what you're presenting when you apply for a job, and that's you know, that's all I'm saying. I'm not saying there are any rights or wrongs. I'm just making you aware of the risks. Some commercial issues. If you were to say that you're looking for another job, people may infer that there are problems at work, that there are financial issues. So, you know, you need to be careful of that. Putting internal information out on the internet, again, is, well, it could be breaching the law. It's certainly to the commercial detriment of any organisation. And we're all privy to lots of information that the institution wouldn't want to get out there. You need to be very careful with any intellectual property that has commercial aspects. You know, obviously we have academic processes, but I would advise that we follow those processes. And you know, it could just be the odd mention in a blog or a Twitter message that sends a message out about the institution that you don't want people to know. And I just mentioned academic. There is a traditional academic model of publication, and putting things out on blogs or tweeting sort of rubs against that traditional academic model. Now, I'm not suggesting that that's wrong, but I would advise any individual not just to say, well, sod it, I'm going to do it my own way, because I don't think that will work. Nor do I think a university saying, this is our rule and it's unbendable, because in some particular fields, there is a real movement to using social media and using the internet, and they're moving away from academic publication. And if that's the way that the profession is going, then by all means follow it. But other subjects still have a very traditional publication methodology for their academic approach. So I think rather than an individual deciding their own rules, there needs to be a consensus about how perhaps a department or a discipline does these things, rather than people just taking it off their own bat. But I'm going to now, in the next 10 minutes, talk about how we address some of these things. Now, I think we all need to be responsible in how we use social media, both institutions, staff, and students. All of these things are grey areas, and so because they're grey areas, we need to act responsibly. We need to be thoughtful. Staff and students alike, it makes no difference. And we also need to remember that this applies to a university channel, or a personal account. And we also need to look at the balance between what work and non-work is. Now the grey area, as I said, social media has blurred the boundaries between personal and professional. And I find if you go onto somebody's professional blog site or their Twitter page, you find little nice chunks of personal stuff which makes the blogs and the Twitter more interesting. I think it illustrates people much more. So I don't think it's something that we should necessarily shy away from in its entirety. But what we need to do is we need to set up a framework in which that is allowed and acceptable. We need to be varied and flexible on how we do that. How exactly that's done is a matter for every institution. But I don't think it's right necessarily to say you can't put anything on your work blog about personal matters. What we need to do though is we need to have rules that cover all these things. There should be something about the use of social media in staff employment contracts, student codes of conduct. We need to mention it in disciplinary policies, and I would also advise that you have a social media policy that makes it clear what the rules are, what is expected of you, and how you should operate. Now, I just mentioned about university and personal channels. If somebody puts something on a university channel that they shouldn't, it's very easy because you're in control, you can discipline somebody, you might be able to get it removed. But what if people are putting things on non-university channels? Now, if I had a completely separate life and I was known in certain circles as, let's say, Love Bunny, and I had my own blog and it never mentioned my name or my job or anything, that's absolutely fine because the university has no connection with that. But if I had a personal blog and I put on what I was doing tonight, you know, going to do a quiz, and tomorrow I'm going up to Newcastle, and Friday I'm going to wherever, and then I mentioned, oh, I'm speaking at a UCISA event for the University of Salford, I'm bringing the university into my personal life. And therefore, anything that can be seen on that personal blog can have a connection with the university. And if I end up doing something that I shouldn't do, I'm bringing the university into disrepute. So while my Love Bunny site, while it was completely separate from my work, if I mention the two on my personal blog, then I need to be very careful. Professional blog, you need to be even more careful. And if you've got a corporate blog, say, or Facebook page, you need to make sure that you're not mentioning anything at all. But there are perhaps gradations there. And you need to work out what your work balance is. Can you put pictures of your kittens on your work blog? Can you put things about work on your personal blog? That's something for an institution to decide. What is it, 80-20, 2/3, 1/3, or is it 100%, 0%? They're questions that each institution has to decide. I would have thought 80-20 is perhaps best, but that's up to an institution. And we need to be sensible. We need to have sensible institutions imposing sensible rules, and individuals need to be sensible, staff and students. Sensible institutions, again, they need rules, and I'll come on to that, but they need different rules for different circumstances. Every different channel, Facebook, Twitter, blogs, you name it, will be slightly different. You need different levels at an institution. A corporate message may be very different to, say, a rugby club, and you can't have the same rules applying to both. So perhaps what you need to do is come up with different rules for different, as I say, levels. And you need different rules for staff and students, because you have to give students more scope to be individuals, because they're not members of staff. They're less controllable, and you know they should have their own voice. Now, very briefly, finally, just some of the rules, and I've mentioned these. Each channel: corporate, departmental, a personal work blog, and then the student stuff that's perhaps not as controllable. Work out what your levels are and come up with separate rules for each of those. Work out what the rules are for a member of staff as an employee, and for students as students at an institution. While they may have more latitude, they're still bound by student codes of conduct. They're not allowed to bring the institution into dispute. Make sure you've got any disclaimers for things like the rugby club website. You know, you can put on there, while the rugby club is associated with the university is not liable for anything they do or say or believe. Work out which rules apply where. Make sure everybody knows what those rules are. And make sure you know what the impact on other communication channels are. Social media is all well and good, but there are internal communication systems. There is still a role for email. There's a role for the World Wide Web. and the intranet. There's a role for VLEs and all other things. So you need to work out what the role and the purpose of social media channels are. Sensible people, I would advise that you keep your home life mainly at home, and you only bring into work the stuff that you can bring into work. You keep work life mainly at work, and you only mention in your personal bloggings and things that are all right and that you can be mentioning. Make sure that you abide by the rules, the rule of law, your employer or university rules if you're a student, and the other existing policies you've got about things like Facebook acceptable use policies and Google acceptable use policies, and make sure you know what they are, because nobody ever reads them. But how do you know if you're not getting into trouble unless you read them? And remember the most important thing, that nothing on the internet is private. It will be found. So in conclusion, in the next 3 minutes, there are laws that you've got to abide by, and make sure that you do abide by them. But more importantly, an individual or an institution's reputation may be damaged by the use of social media and the content that you or others put out there. Institutions and individuals have to act sensibly and responsibly. But unfortunately, there isn't a magic bullet. You know, if you came here expecting me to give the answers, I can't do that, I'm afraid. But what I would advise, the final 4 words that I hope you remember with this presentation, is that you need rules, but they need to be flexible rules, and you need to be responsible and sensible. And if you bear those 4 things in mind, you won't go far wrong. So that's everything that I had. In the remaining 2.5 minutes, does anybody have any questions?
Is there any sort of wider framework of rules that something like Janet has sort of put together, or JISC, so that we could use those as a starting point?
I think there are some rules from JISC, but when coming up with a social media policy, it's not as easy to do the old usual sort of like plagiarism thing. You know, type in data protection policy and see what comes up and steal all the best bits. Because a lot of institutions don't have the types of policy that I believe they need to have, saying you can do this, you can't do that. This is what rules apply at these different levels. So, you know, JISC have done something, but I think there needs to be more work. And this is exactly what I meant when I said use of social media has gone far ahead of the rules behind it. So I think we're all playing catch up, to be honest. No more questions? No, well, I'd like to thank you very much. I will be around over lunch if you have any questions, and this will be available to you probably through some social media, no doubt. And my contact details are on the presentation, so you're more than welcome to get in touch if you've got any questions.
Will it be on your Love Bunny site as well?
All of this is made up. Thank you very much.
Thank you.